Hello, everyone. This is Adrienne Lloyd. I'm here with the Women in Healthcare podcast, and I am so excited to have a dear friend and former colleague of mine, Roshy Didehban, here from Mayo Clinic to join us. And Roshy is the Chief Administrative Officer of Mayo Clinic in Arizona, the #1 hospital ranked by U.S. News and World Report for 11 years in a row. She works with the CEO, Dr. Gray, to provide leadership and implement the Mayo Clinic strategic plan, as well as just helping it really expand their presence in Arizona and the Southwest. Prior to becoming Chief Administrative Officer, she worked as the Chief Practice Officer for Mayo Clinic, focusing on organization-wide strategic and operational leadership for clinical quality, patient experience, patient access, nursing, clinical systems, and health information management services, and also as the secretary and lead for the clinical practice committee. She has been at Mayo Clinic since 2002 and has had a variety of roles, as well as working on numerous committees at both the site and enterprise level. And she also is an assistant professor in healthcare administration and a fellow of the American College of Healthcare Executives, and has a bachelor's of science in community health from University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and a master's of health science in health finance and management from Johns Hopkins University, and is just, again, as I said, a very dear friend, and just someone I cannot share with you guys how much I value this individual and how strong of a leader and female I think she is. And I'm just excited for the conversation. So Roshy, thank you so much for taking the time to be here today and to share with all of us. And really, we were excited to have this platform to just be able to share. We've all got so many different stories, both as leaders and as women in healthcare. And just, I think there's so many similarities as we all go through our journeys that we really just to be able to share with each other and can all learn from each other in some way. So thank you so much for taking the time to be here.
Adrienne, thank you so much for inviting me and just the opportunity. I couldn't agree with you more that so many of our stories are similar, and the more we can share and really share what we've learned over time and how we've navigated our journey, I think the stronger we become as leaders and especially healthcare leaders. So thank you for the invitation.
Oh, of course. Absolutely. I can wait to get you on here. So, but I'd love to just start off and, have you share a little bit with why you chose healthcare and healthcare leadership, you kind of in the first place, and really, what do you love most about what you do and what you're working on?
Yeah, thanks for that. You know, Thinking back to like what first energized me about healthcare, I go all the way back to high school. And, I really do think of working in healthcare as a calling, and it's a calling to serve others. But in my high school years, I volunteered at a children's HIV clinic at Cook County Hospital in Chicago, which is the major county hospital in Chicago, Illinois, and can be a very challenging place. And they so struggled with finances that this HIV children's clinic was like literally in the hallway between the ED and the clinic building. It was literally in like a thoroughfare. And so I observed all the challenges, right, in healthcare. I observed the challenges in access to healthcare, the fragmentation of healthcare, the cost of healthcare. But I also got to see this power of hope, the power of healing, the power of compassion. And working with those children really inspired within me this fire. And that fire of wanting to serve others and wanting to serve a greater purpose is something that like continues my motivation today, and also is what I love doing today. And it's why I continue to work in healthcare.
That's awesome. No, I love that. I love that. I had a similar experience working in the children's actually patient like playroom area when I was in college. And I was already probably on the healthcare path, but it was just, yeah, there's something about pediatrics, even though didn't spend a ton of my time there, but it just, yeah. Um, all right, so let's talk. We wanted to talk today really about failure and perseverance and just overall growth. And, why do you feel, I know you have recently shared some of these lessons that you've learned along the way with some other kind of forums and speaking engagements as well. But what do you feel, failure, why is it so important for growth to really just help us
Yeah.
move forward? And what have you found? And maybe an
Yeah.
example too.
Yeah, I mean, I think as I think back, I think many of us in our careers or as children really started with some pretty dangerous comments. And what I mean by that is like, I think we were all told as young children, failure is not an option. Or we were told like number two is the first loser. And like, imagine like in my household, I remember I'd like bring home an A and my dad would joke and say, where's the plus? Like it was never good enough.
Yeah.
Like we were
Why
kind
did
of
you get
like
a
in
96?
this, exactly, this like perfectionism as the
Yeah.
focus. And so when you think about that as the starting point for how many of us grew up, what it does is it creates this natural fear of failure. And I think many of us would agree that that fear of failure has in many ways caused us to avoid risk,
Yeah.
avoid opportunities, and especially avoid taking on assignments where success is not clearly defined and it's not laid out well. And so I have seen in my career these amazing leaders. And of course, Adrienne, you're not one of them because you've taken risk after risk after risk,
Oh,
which
I
I
don't
love
know. I
about
still
you.
feel that way. I still feel that
but
way.
like but like
Yeah.
I've seen these amazing leaders that avoid kind of taking on that hard ambiguous assignment
Yeah.
that's going to help them grow dramatically as leaders because of the fear of failure and because they don't know exactly how to accomplish a goal.
Right.
And I believe that as leaders, and especially in healthcare, we have to be willing to take on the unsolvable problems
Yeah.
and really have the potential to fail at trying them. But if we don't push ourselves, we're not going to be able to achieve that transformed healthcare system where we can care for our patients better, care for our communities better, care for each other better. We have to be willing to kind of solve the unsolvable. And that's why I think failure is really critical to growth. Like you have to fail because that's what makes you stronger.
Right. Yeah. And there's no way that we're going to know the answers
Yeah.
the first time. But no, I
Agreed.
think I appreciate you saying I've taken risk. And I definitely have taken risk, but I think we all have.
Yeah.
But I hear what you're saying and that fear of like not knowing. And I do think that's something as leaders we can all do better of like really crafting the vision of what does success look like in that
Yes.
role or with that project for our team. And I think that helps allay some of that fear. But it's
Mhm.
I mean, I still feel it. I know you still feel it too. And it's that like pushing through in spite of and knowing. But I agree. It's one of those things and
And I
it's
think sometimes like we get stuck on the process rather than the outcome. And
yeah,
I think if we can really focus on what is like that major purpose or goal or outcome, it gives us the flexibility to like pivot and flex in how we get to that outcome. But I find that oftentimes as leaders, we overly focus on the process
right.
and we don't overly focus on, no, but what should this look like at the end? And what's the best way to get to that end spot?
Oh, I think that's absolutely critical. It's the and not and I think too as leaders, I think we often we're trained as well to be very prescriptive with our teams and to and when you start out as your leader in your new role too to some degree like you're trying to learn the details, you're trying to figure out which team member has the skills and capability to take the right actions and so you are in the weeds more. And then as
Mm,
you move up and you move into bigger roles, I know it's one of the things that was a challenge for me and still is like crafting that vision, giving
yeah.
your team like some rough parameters so they don't waste time, so they don't, set off an alarm bell somewhere, that you were going to see coming, but also giving them the freedom to actually create what that journey looks like.
Mm.
Um, yeah, no, I
I
think that,
agree. I agree. And I also think that, in healthcare, we save lives every day. I mean, that is part of why we're in healthcare is because we
yeah,
want to provide new solutions to patients. We want to help them achieve health. And really help them navigate through some of the most vulnerable times in their lives.
yeah,
And so healthcare has a lot of focus on perfectionism.
right,
But I think sometimes we forget there's a lot of business processes around that perfectionism that
yep,
you can take risk on. You can try new things and do different things without impacting the care of those patients, which is
right.
our very focus and our very mission.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's one of the things, and I process improvement background. Like if when you really map out a process or you look at,
Mm,
I mean, usually it's 10 to 20% of the actual process is
yes.
really impacting the direct patient care
Mm,
quality. And we, of course, want to make that as fantastic as possible and as perfect as possible. But it's
Yeah.
all the rest of the stuff that,
Yes.
we can really make significant impact, save time, and make it just
Yeah.
more enjoyable to
But
do what we do.
But what an incredible like metric you just shared, which is that 80% of the things we do in healthcare we can innovate around. Like that's what I just
Yeah,
heard. Like you say, it's
absolutely. Yeah,
if 10 to 20% are really focused on the patient, that means we have the space to innovate in healthcare and really transform the way we deliver care in a way that is more efficient, more accessible, less fragmented, more
right.
personalized. I mean, there's a huge capacity for us to really innovate.
Absolutely. And we still can innovate in that 20%, that 10, 20%. I
Yeah.
think just sometimes what I see is people, and often that 10 to 20% is involving the physicians, right?
Yes.
They're like, well, if they just change, then it'll all
Yeah.
be. And I'm like, well, yes, there may need to be changes there. And I know, Mayo, when I was there, and you guys still are doing a lot of work and conversations around, standardization and what needs to be similar in terms of both process, administrative and operational, but also clinical, and to create more consistency of care. And those things are extremely important. But I think it's often hard, and people focus too much on that, like what needs to be consistent from how our providers treat X, Y, or Z patient. It's very important. But if the rest of the processes are so dysfunctional or just disjointed, it's really hard to have those conversations. It's hard to have data to have those
Hmm.
conversations. And then it's hard to like really create success there, because the providers are understandably saying, well, yeah, okay, look at
Yeah.
all of these things over here that need to change. So absolutely. So, we talked about that really, in order to, it sounds like the paradox of failure is that you must fail more to succeed more. Is there a experience that you've had where you're like, okay, a reminder perhaps along the way that you've
Yes.
felt that?
Um, yeah, so I truly believe that in order to have the most successful career as a leader, you have to be willing to fail. And I do think we all need to be more comfortable with failure. And I think about like key leadership attributes that require a willingness to fail. You think about risk tolerance, you think
Yeah,
about curiosity. We talked a lot about innovation and change,
yeah,
entrepreneurship, all of those capabilities that we believe are really critical to leaders require us to be comfortable with failure. And so you ask about like an experience I had, and my very first experience with failure was really early in my career, and it was my first job after the fellowship. And
very
you
vivid.
mentioned earlier, Adrian, like that, like, you get into your first role and you're trying to be perfect. And that's where I was. And I was one of those early leaders in my career, 20 plus years ago, that first job after my administrative fellowship. And my physician partner pulled me aside one day and said, Roshy, you're failing. And it was my first time in my life anyone had ever told me I was failing. And what he said to me was, you're failing to engage your team.
Mm,
You're failing to create followership. You're
yeah,
failing to recognize accomplishments of those that you're working with and how they're serving our patients and our communities. And, it was really hard to hear that.
yeah,
And so the first thing I often tell individuals I'm working with is anytime someone takes the risk to give you feedback, the
yeah.
first thing out of your mouth, no matter what, is thank you.
Thank you.
And the reason is because they're taking a risk. They're taking a risk that they care so much about you and your development that they're willing to take the risk that you're going to be defensive or argumentative or cry in front of them, and they're gonna have to like manage you crying. And I have cried many times, just to be
Likewise.
clear.
Me too. Often in
I
my
did not
car, but
I did not cry in that moment, but I have cried many times throughout my career at work. And it's okay. It's okay to
yes.
show emotion at work. Um, but started with thank you. But then, there's three things that I think are really important when you're thinking about how do you get through a failure, or how do you get through when you hit that failure point? And there's three things I often say. One is, and I did this in this case, number one, you have to pick your attitude.
Yeah.
Are you going to be a pessimist and say, well, forget it, I'm not going to do it? Or are you going to be an optimist and say, I can choose to see that there's an opportunity here for me to be better. The second
Right.
one is I think you have to pick your perspective. And so you can have self-pity or you can choose to overcome. And I love that quote that your attitude determines your altitude. And the attitude, the perspective you bring to the problem allows you to have that perseverance to get through it. And then the last thing I often say is pick your purpose. Why are you doing what you do every day? Why do you come into work? Why do you work with the people you work with? And if you can figure out what that greater purpose is, that purpose can actually get you through any kind of conflict or hurdle or failure because
Right.
you're aiming for a bigger goal. And
Yeah.
so in working with that physician, first and foremost, I was like, thank you. Second is I deeply invested in myself. And I said, clearly, I don't have the skill set to lead people, which I
Mhm.
saw my greater purpose, which is that I wanted to grow my career of commitment and care at Mayo Clinic. And so I invested in myself and I said, you know what? I have great people around me. I have colleagues. I was working with you around that time. And I have people who care about me and they're going to help me get through this and learn to do it better and continue to succeed. And I wanted to serve that greater purpose of Mayo Clinic and put the needs of our patients first.
Well, I think a lot of leaders, myself included, struggle with, I think early in your career, or even, neither of us have official clinical backgrounds. We weren't nurses or techs or anything. So, but I think probably those individuals with a clinical background may even have more of a challenge with this, where
Mm,
you're shifting from that be or the do, the doer,
the
the like
doer.
finding the answers, the solving the problems, the triaging the issues, to the like leading and guiding and coaching other, the leader, the guider, the coach, right? Like
Mm,
shift is really, really challenging. And not because we don't want to lead and we don't want to be a coach, we don't want to be a guide. Like we want to support our team. We love seeing, I know you love that mentorship process as much as I do. But we're to some degree, we're kind of protective of our team. We don't want them to make a mistake and like cause us or cause
great.
them more so, challenges. But we also are just, want to be, really part of that. And it's shifting the
Mm.
mindset of being part, like helping facilitate the change versus making the changes or doing those activities. It's a challenge. I think a lot of people really struggle with that.
It is. And I mean, I've struggled a lot in my career around that art of delegation.
Mhm.
And, the two lessons from two different mentors in my career, the first was if you delegate something and they get it 90% of the way that you would have done it, you
Yes.
should take it as a win because you didn't have to do it. The second person said to me that when you don't delegate, you're actually taking something away from the development of others.
Yeah.
And that, you delegating is their opportunity to grow and learn and develop and struggle and fail and get better. And when you don't do it, you're actually like lessening their ability to progress in their careers. And
Yeah.
so it is a gift you're giving to those who will hopefully succeed you in future roles by not delegating, by not investing. But it's hard. It's something
Yeah.
I still really
Letting
struggle
go.
with.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, honestly, maybe delegation, as much as it is a word and it is, something we're all familiar with, it is that like offering of the opportunity or engaging, right? It's more of
Mhm.
that than it's like, I'm just giving you this work. It's like, no, I want you, I believe in you. And as you said too, like, I think when somebody gives you feedback, like most often we're not giving feedback to people if we feel like they're not capable of change. But those
Yes.
people that we can see more in and we believe can do more and be better and all of those things, those are the ones that we can and we should give that
Mm.
feedback to. We should give them the opportunity to
I
lead and
completely agree.
so
Completely agree.
yeah. So the physician saw that in you. He wouldn't have said it in the first place, but
Hopefully.
I think they were
Hopefully
right.
I didn't disappoint them.
I highly doubt it. Um, so we talked about failure but what about perseverance? Like what is, is really that's defined as, doing something despite difficulty or delay, having those delays and achieving success. How do you define perseverance and why is it important? And is there an
Yeah.
example where you've really just felt you had to lean into
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, so we've talked a lot in other environments about resilience, and I have struggled a little bit with resilience because resilience to me feels like people are attacking me and I have to be strong and stand up.
Right.
Whereas to me, perseverance is something that I don't just have to defend against. I actually am owning, leading
Moving.
forward and
Yeah.
continuing to try, et cetera. And so I actually do think there's such a power in perseverance, and it's being steadfast, it's being determined, it's persisting in the face of those challenges, those obstacles. It's having clarity on what is the goal you're ultimately trying to achieve, and then giving yourself the space and capacity to say, I'm determined, I'm going to get to that point, and I'll pivot along the way, and that's okay. But I am actively going to continue to make it to that goal. And so I do think that difference between
Yeah.
resilience and persistence or perseverance is an important one, just to like sit with and really think about what is the difference there, and why is it really perseverance that allows you to continue to grow and develop.
Yeah.
So as I think about like my career around that, one example was probably mid-career. Interestingly, the person that I did this work with uh, asked me in an interview for the role. He said, "Would you rather have 4 successes and 0 failures, or 5 successes and 3 failures?" And at that time in my career, when I was such a perfectionist, it was like, I only want the four
Right.
successes. I don't want any failures. The good thing is that he took me on anyways as his
Yeah.
partner. He taught me a lot about innovation kind of through our work together. But, an example of, we decided that we wanted to outsource coding in the emergency department. He was the chair of the emergency department. And it's something that had never been done before at Mayo Clinic. And there were naysayers everywhere. So IT, finance, risk, over and over and over again, where people were like, these are all the reasons you can't do it. And so in that case, for me, perseverance began with clarity of vision. Like
Right.
I knew what I wanted to accomplish, why I wanted to accomplish it, why it was good for Mayo Clinic. And where I landed was I became very clear on the goal,
Yeah.
but I became very flexible on the process and the timeline and the approach on how to get there.
Yeah.
And to me, that's an example of perseverance. You're very clear on the goal, but you're willing to be flexible on other things that ensure that you can get to that point. And it was tough and we fought really hard, but ultimately we got it done.
I am not surprised, but no, I think that's one thing I'm still, now even, in my own entrepreneurial space,
Mm-hmm.
it's a completely different journeys. And I was actually talking to my own coach today earlier about the like really getting clear on the vision. So journaling,
Mm-hmm.
whatever those, writing those things out, having your outcomes, and then trusting the how. And as you said, being able to like pivot along the way, it's really hard. Not
It is
not
really
always
hard.
enjoyable. So and I think holding that space too as leaders, holding that space for our team to do the same thing and to have those mini failures along the way. Both many and many, but like, yeah,
Yes,
like really helping them do that and trusting that you're there for feedback and guidance, but not and
agree.
criticism where it needs to be constructive. But yeah, it's
Yes.
trusting that is
Mm-hmm.
I love that how you phrase
Yeah.
that.
And trusting the journey. Life
Yeah.
is a journey. And there is a piece of it that is also about trusting the journey, that, that if your intention is right and your vision is strong, that, there's a bit of trust that it takes as you work with others and kind of get to that goal, that it's going to work out.
Yeah. Do you feel like I feel like you and I know, I guess, over 20 years now. I feel like there's an element maybe early on, and you've kind of said this too, like in our careers where we felt like we had to be the tougher, the stronger, the more
Mhm.
poised, the more both for ourselves and how we presented and also for our teams. Like you felt like you had to carry a lot more. And even though you were in bigger roles now, do you feel like you get to be, and this is a little off script, so I didn't give you this
No, it's
question, but
okay.
do you feel like you get to actually lean back more into, as you said, trusting the journey kind of being a little, not that you're not super
Mm.
strong and able to make those tough decisions and have those tough conversations, because I know you do. We've had them ourselves, but that you get to kind of lean more into like that softer side at times. And how does it feel
Yeah.
different compared to
I
maybe
I
even 10 years
probably
ago?
no, I think it's a good question because I probably do feel like I've gotten to the point where I can be my most authentic self. And I'm not saying that there aren't moments where I like put on my game face and
Sure,
I am,
of course.
but last week actually I was on a Zoom meeting and it was like the preliminary discussion before we got to the agenda. And someone who I've known at Mayo Clinic probably for, 10 years, just commented to me. They said, you know, Roshi, when you and I first met, it was probably 6 or 7 years ago. They were like, my first meeting with you, we were in Rochester, Minnesota, and you said, I forgot my flat iron in Arizona and my hair is a mess. And she's like, in that moment, she said, I realized you are a real person. You are not like Roshi
Right.
on high. Like
Yeah.
you are a real woman. You're a real person.
Right.
And I know that's like kind of a silly example, but like those moments where we can just be ourselves and be authentic.
Yeah.
I think people know when you're being inauthentic as a leader and
Yeah.
it creates distrust. And I think the more you can be really clear about who you are as a person and what your principles are and what you believe about leadership, and the more you can be vulnerable
Yeah.
about your challenges or things that don't go well, I do feel like I've gotten to the point in my career where I can be my true authentic self. I can be honest about where I'm vulnerable or the mistakes I've made in my career. And just because you share those things, just because you're vulnerable,
Right.
doesn't take away from your confidence and your
Yeah.
capability and your ability to lead the organization. And I think it's important. I do think it's important.
Yeah, I think it's actually those moments that I've had, as you mentioned, like we've all shed a few tears along the way.
Yeah.
Most of the times when I got to that point in those roles, it wasn't from like being sad. It wasn't really that I got like somebody attacked me or upset me or anything like that. It was honestly a lot of it was overwhelm. And I think, being like carrying the like, well, what if this or what if
Burden.
knowing the organization or the market shifting or whatever those things are that you as a leader feel like, we mentioned like protecting your team, right? Like, I don't want them to worry. In those moments when you're trying to carry all of that, like those were the moments where, I
Mm.
remember very clearly, like just being like, I have to excuse myself now, but not before the tears came. But in those moments, that was when the team, kind of like walked back in and they're kind of looking at each other because they're like, oh, wow, like we didn't know that we were just in that like driver mode, right? Like we were driving the
Mm.
change and trying to make things
Mm.
happen. But yet, when those moments where you're able to actually show them and communicate, like, this is the why, this is where we are, here's the good, bad, and
Mm.
not, really ugly, but
Yeah.
also we're going to be okay. And as you said, that like clarity of vision and then getting them to come along with you, like those moments of vulnerability and transparency are so huge.
Agree. Completely agree.
Yeah. So once we along those lines, what are one or two ways that you've really cultivated like mindful practice to kind of help you navigate your leadership roles and just life and
Yeah.
more?
So the first, the first thought that comes to my mind is actually what we just talked about. And being your authentic self. I think part of being your authentic self is recognizing what does it take for you to be your best self at work every day.
Yeah.
So as leaders and in life, but like as leaders, um, the eyes are often on us, how we show up, how we engage, how we communicate. And what I recognized early in my career is that when I was not in my best place, when I was not my best self, it's when I showed up as a leader I didn't want to be. I
Yeah.
was short with people, I was condescending, I was stressed. I was like, I had those behaviors that was not the ultimate leader I wanted to be as a person. And the lesson I had to learn was, what does it take for Roshi to show up every day as her best self?
Yeah.
And that is different for every person.
Sure.
So for me, it's I need to get enough sleep. I need to have a venti Americano in the morning. I need the caffeine. I
Yeah.
need, like, I love to travel. I need the breaks
Yeah.
that allow me to travel and see the world. But that first kind of strategy is figuring out, we know 50% of leaders are struggling to cope with the challenges of their job,
Yeah. At least. Yes.
at least.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's what the data tells us.
Yeah.
And so if that's the case, we all need to take a step back and say, what does it take for me to show up every day as my best self?
Right.
That's my goal. And you schedule and you make time for that every day, every week, to ensure that you are taking care of yourself. You have those coping strategies, you have those things that allow you to show up as your best self, and you do them consistently.
Yeah.
So that would be the first thing. The second thing I think is critically important is gratitude. Um, and I might do two things: gratitude and awe.
Mhm.
I think working in healthcare, we deliver, and not me personally, our teams
Yeah.
deliver miracles every single day. Our teams transform lives every single day. Um, we walk outside and there's like beautiful trees and birds and mountains and whatever may be in your environment. And I think cultivating a practice of both being grateful for the incredible things that are happening around us and having that sense of awe about what we get to deliver every day, I think it creates joy. I
Mhm.
think it allows you to have a different perspective when challenges arise because you're coming from that perspective of gratitude as kind of your starting point.
Oh, I love those. I love those. And I think that's where, anything that, the first things you talked about too, really create understanding and identifying what are those things that are going to replenish your energy and give you kind of joy and happiness. And not only making time for them and scheduling them, I think it's really important too to have those conversations to engage and enroll, your significant other, friends, family, but also your
Agree.
those team in that, like this really helps me be my best self. Some people it may be, I need to go to the gym. I've had providers, physicians who are like, it's really important to me to go to the gym 3 times a week. And that means they didn't want to, it didn't always work, but come in for that early meeting. And okay, but having the understanding of the why versus
Agree.
just like them not being willing to do something, having those conversations with your team around this is important for me to be my best self. And also, I want to try as best we can to create those same moments or hours or, components for you that are going to connect with you. And sometimes that happens inside the work, container, and sometimes it's outside, the work
Mhm.
container. But having that conversation of supporting that I think is super important because I know as a leader, I've had moments where I've not done those things and I've pushed myself to the limits. And I was actually being a really bad role model for my
Mhm.
team because they were trying to emulate me in that way. And it was, a very fast track to burnout for all of us. We course corrected, but yeah, that's, really having that awareness is so important. And just starting to have that dialogue, I think, is critical. Um,
Agree. Yeah, I think that dialogue is a really good point. And I think it was Adrian, I think it was you who told me about someone you were working with that couldn't get to like their kids' soccer game or
yeah,
something. And like when they had the discussion with their team wanted them to get to their kids' soccer game. And so that ability to be vulnerable, trust your
yeah,
team, share that thing that's important to
right.
you, and have them help you accomplish that
Yeah,
thing, I think is just an
yeah,
incredible approach. And it does take vulnerability as a leader to share what that thing is.
yeah.
But I also think that, we want to help each other.
Yeah.
That's human nature.
I know. Well, and I had another one of the groups I was coaching with, another guy who was actually, he said, I want to find love and like be in a
Yeah.
relationship. And he's like, but I have to keep canceling dates all the time because the practice
Wow.
was running late or they were having some meeting
Mm.
or some conversation with a physician we all have had or leader, turns the 30-minute conversation turns into 2 hours. And, he's like, nobody's going to be in a relationship with me because I can't be consistent and have that,
Mm.
ability to show up. And, being at his vulnerability in those moments to share that in front of his team
Mhm.
because I do realize, and I am a mom, but I realized when I wasn't a mom, and
Yeah.
people bring up their kids, you're kind of like, well, not all of us have those things, but everybody has something
Something.
they want
Mhm.
both bigger for maybe their career, but also bigger in their life or different in their life, and being able to have that conversation and support each other. It's just, yeah, it's so key. Because we do, and I love the gratitude and awe. It's really creating those moments too. It's, like happiness is not a like end goal. It's those like moments of joy and, excitement along the way,
Yes.
what we do and how we get to partner together and really
Mhm.
creating that team. So,
Mhm.
oh, well, to
Yeah.
that, is there something right now that you guys are working on at Mayo that you're really excited about, and what impact are you working to create, or do you hope you'll create kind of coming through that?
So what's interesting is if like you take a step back in 2019, Mayo Clinic really made a commitment that we wanted to lead the transformation of healthcare, which is a really bold statement for
Yeah,
an organization to say, especially as we know how complicated healthcare is. And I,
right,
mentioned it earlier. It's really fragmented. It's not affordable. It's hard to access. We have major workforce challenges. It's not personal enough. And you look at how many healthcare organizations are not in a sustainable position to continue to invest in healthcare. And so, we talk about failure perseverance. Imagine how much failure and perseverance it's going to take to transform healthcare. Um,
right.
and so, we recognize that in being bold in that way, in wanting to figure out how do we use our data and expertise, use platform approaches, use digital, accelerate how we utilize our data to deliver brand new solutions to patients globally, and really ensuring we're adopting new technology. That has been our focus broadly as an organization. At Mayo Clinic in Arizona, we've been embracing that change. We've launched an AI innovation hub, really looking for ways to drive AI capabilities through our organization, serving our patients and staff. Um, One of the things I'm really excited about is this year, the last year, we launched what we call Discovery Oasis.
Mm,
And Discovery Oasis is a 120-acre biomedical corridor that's really focused on innovation. So we plan to bring together a community of both established and early stage biotechnology companies, researchers, entrepreneurs, all who are committed to this transformation of healthcare. These 120 acres are located directly across the street from our Mayo Clinic Phoenix campus, right across from our hospital and our researchers and our physicians. And we're really trying to create an ecosystem of change. And so that's something that really excites me. We've
yes,
engaged almost 40 companies at this point who have an interest on locating at Discovery Oasis, and
yep,
hoping to get shovels in the ground in 2024 so that we can really
awesome.
kick off that space. So I'm super excited about that. But I would also say what I'm most proud of is our people.
Yeah,
Over the last year, we have grown our staff by nearly 12%.
wow.
And you can imagine like that dramatic growth and accelerated pace. It's like, how do you keep people connected to your mission, to your vision, to your values? However, this amazing growth, these amazing people have come together in a truly team-based way, serving our patients, finding new cures, training the next generation, really hitting it out of the park at every level in healthcare. And it's truly the people that I get to work with in Arizona that excite and inspire me about our future.
That's fantastic. Well, and I think you and I too, as you know, and you mentioned every organization in healthcare has really seen significant impacts with turnover the last couple of years. But you and I were talking about turnover rates at Mayo, and extremely, extremely low
Yes.
compared to other organizations that I've
Mhm.
worked with or data that I've seen. And so I think that
Yeah,
focus on the people, the focus on the people, the open conversations around,
agree.
creating that transformation. I think when people can be part of something bigger, it makes such a huge difference, whether that's a team and they really feel connected to that team, which I know is something that's there, or it's a broader, like longer vision. And I don't know, is there anything that you would add to that?
The thing that I think we've really focused on in the last year was deeply connecting with our staff. And as we grow at that accelerated space, at that accelerated pace, Dr. Rick Gray, who's our CEO, and I have been very purposeful in holding monthly meals with our new staff, whether they're physicians or allied health staff, but every single staff member we've taken the time to meet with, to hear their stories, to connect them to our purpose and our mission. But we also want them to know who we are.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that was really important to me moving into the CAO role is I didn't want there to be any barrier between the staff and myself. And, you know, any staff member can reach out to me. I'm happy to meet with anyone. I round regularly to connect with our staff and hear what their challenges are. But then I've also been really purposeful on responding to every single employee. And so we have, you know, quarterly all staff meetings. And even if we don't get to all the electronic questions or that sort of thing, I personally respond to every employee who asks a question, because I do think that responsiveness and connection is really important.
No, it absolutely is. How do you balance that with the large initiatives and efforts that you're also
Yeah.
working on? Is that anything that you
So I
found?
think, you know, I think as a leader, it's important to be focused both on the big stuff and the little stuff. And I
Yeah,
think sometimes, you know, we have to prioritize, right? And now it's, you know, the beginning of the year, you know, we're a week and a half into January. And now's the perfect time to say, what are those goals I have for this year?
yeah,
And it's very easy to get stuck in the fires of the day, the emergencies of the day. But I think if you can take time to say, what are the big things I want to accomplish this year, and refer to them regularly and create time for them on your schedule, I think to me, but it's constant prioritization and balance, right? It's what are the problems I have to solve today, this week, this month, this quarter, this year. But you have to focus both on the big things and the little things simultaneously. And it's hard. I don't
yeah.
really think I have a trick for it, other than to be really clear on what are the big things you want to accomplish and stay really connected to those things to ensure you're moving the ball forward.
I love that. Well, I could talk to you all day, but what's to kind of wrap things up? What's one piece of advice or lesson that you've learned that you wish if you would have known sooner or you would share with others as they kind of move through their challenges and are working to drive success for themselves and their teams?
Yeah, you know, one of them was what I just shared around prioritization. I think early in my career, I was so focused on everything has to get done today and it has to get done well. And I have to check the box on everything. Um,
Do it all
and
myself.
I do think one of the lessons I learned was, and you know, you talked earlier about like having to leave work because you took on so much stress. I mean, that happened to me early in my career where I literally had to leave in the middle of the day and go hide under my covers because I was so completely drained. And the
Yeah,
lesson I learned was, you know, you always have to follow through, right? That's a leadership competency we all need to do. But you also need to be able to, when someone asks you for something, you have to be able to say, I totally understand why you want that. Kind of looking at my priorities, is it okay if I get back to you by next like Friday? Or can I get back to you by the end of the month? And setting appropriate timelines, and setting boundaries in a way that really allows you to feel successful and feel like you can balance, to me, is really important. And then connecting to a greater purpose. I think sometimes we start our careers and we just want to accomplish,
yeah,
and we don't take the time to say, okay, what's the greater purpose here? Why am I doing this each day?
yeah.
And I think having that like personal purpose can really help you in the decisions you make and how you navigate your career.
Right. No, I think that's great. And I think sometimes for me, it was sometimes, being able to kind of reconnect. It may be just taking time to pause and reflect. It may be meeting with your team. It may be walking through, the hospital or the practice or, getting inside an OR procedure room or seeing where kind of the
Yes,
magic happens, right? Like I think
agree.
as administrative leaders, it's easy to feel disconnected from the
Yes.
true things, the gifts and the journeys that our teams are creating every day. And so being able to reconnect with that is so, so important.
I agree.
Thank you so, so much for taking the time to be with us today. And I just really, really appreciate it. And thank you everyone for listening. We will include contact information if you have follow-up questions. And of course, you can connect with Roshy on LinkedIn as well. But just thank you all for listening. And again, we all have similar struggles and challenges and successes as well. So hopefully this was very helpful. So Roshy, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure to spend time with you today.
Thank